I know, my title kinda seems like I'm one of those shallow Gen Z people on the internet trying to make everything seem problematic by overthinking the social implications of everything in a fictional piece of media. Well, the overthinking part is true on my end, but my intention in this video is not at all to call on my viewers to raise their pitchforks against Eula. I just want to draw some insights on class struggles with Eula as a model so that together we can look into how well-meaning rich people can properly sympathize with, the rest of us. And by the way, the whole check your privilege statement does often come across as a thinly veiled way of saying shut up when you disagree with someone who happens to be well off. But I think if we use the term more meaningfully, it should mean that we want someone to understand the sources of their social advantages so that they can be more empathetic towards socially disadvantaged groups of people. I think we should try using it more as a kind feedback rather than as a form of confrontation, and that's something I hope to discuss along the way in this Eula video alongside the strengths and weaknesses of her character writing. But before I get into that, if this video intrigues you, maybe you should consider subscribing to my channel where I specialize in in-depth character analysis. With that out of the way, I now present to you my piece on the scion of the most controversial family in all of Mondstadt, Captain Eula Lawrence. I didn't see a lot of these comments myself, but I have encountered people bringing up the fact that many Genshin players called Eula a slave owner or something like that, and right off the bat you can tell that they're missing the point of her character. Although the Lawrence family has been the most notable oppressor during Mondstadt's aristocratic reign, the point of Eula's character is that, she's breaking free from the shackles of this family. She is expressing her stance by disowning them and joining an organization that the Lawrence clan despises to the core. In her own story quest, we even find her apprehending her own uncle, showing that she'd be the last to condone her own family's actions and she will not extend any kind of special treatment towards them. Through this, we can tell that Eula is a principled woman who follows her own value system rather than that of her clan. She's also an exemplar of Mondstadt's value of freedom because she broke free from her family. Rebellion is a key theme within Mondstadt's history and culture, so the fact that Eula rebelled against her own family is a display of her tenacity and the strength of her will, and that's the same rebellion which has fueled Mondstadt's continuous progress. For instance, you may not know this, but the Wanderer's Troop artifact set is actually based on a squad of historical figures who fought battles using weapons that could make music, hence you have the stringless, the bell, the flute, and the wood scythe. They stormed into Mondstadt to incite a rebellion and help set the stage for Vanessa's revolt as well. One of the troop's key members was actually a Lawrence too, who went by the nickname Kreutzlied, and his being part of this group was a sign of his defection from his clan. So seeing how Eula parallels Kreutzlied is a very powerful image that showcases how people like this are the ones who have built up and will continue to uphold Mondstadt's true values. However, I do like how Eula's character is much more complicated than just being the only good apple in a cart of bad apples. Even though she's disowned her family, many of her aristocratic habits still remain, and I find that much more realistic compared to her simply being the sweetest, kindest, most down-to-earth person who isn't elitist at all even by accident. I think her being snooty does have a positive message as well because it communicates that even someone who might have trouble adjusting to the rest of society because of their high standards of living may still be capable of opposing their fellow upper-class people due to their sheer strength of will. It shows that even people who are imperfect can make the right decision and make their own people accountable for their misdeeds. And that accountability is likely what she hints at with her catchphrase, "Vengeance will be mine." Nonetheless, I still do have a few issues with Eula's characterization. I know lots of people take issue with her personality itself, but I think it's more of an issue with the framing of her decisions and the conversation surrounding her character in-game. I think that the writers really are pushing for us to sympathize with her right away, so in lots of scenes they depict Eula suffering at the hands of regular Mondstadt citizens who discriminate against her simply because she's a Lawrence. And I think one time she even called herself a pariah in the English translation, and that's kinda questionable considering she's from an insanely rich family. I think this is the part where the check your privilege part comes in, because in lots of scenes she's almost acting as if she's the victim in the scenario without understanding where the common Mondstadters are coming from. Now, let me be clear, there is still some prejudice coming from the end of Mondstadters, and I think it's a huge phenomenon even in real life where people vilify rich people a bit more than richness itself. Like, they find it so easy to crap on rich people for good reason, but they don't brainstorm on policies that can help lessen income inequality. However, in Eula's case, the class dynamics are represented in such an unrealistic and caricatured way. Like, just because she exists, people are now somehow mad at her and we have to comfort Eula because people had an opinion. I'm not saying, by the way, that we shouldn't comfort Eula, but more like I wish these scenarios wherein she's lambasted by her fellow citizens would be depicted as more complex. A very, very easy way to do this is simply by making those people only diss her in response to her saying something insensitive unintentionally. Then this way, Genshin can foster more interesting conversations on how to bridge the gap between the well-intentioned rich and the poor and middle class, as well as how a privileged person like Eula can take this feedback to become a better person. I do notice though it's quite difficult for some Hoyoverse writers to do this, as evidenced with how they treated someone like the Raiden Shogun. It seems like they rushed to get her redemption arc done so that the fans wouldn't have to be bothered with critically analyzing the actions of their favorite waifu and processing moral ambiguity. And yet, this strategy backfires for some people because now it makes it seem like these characters are jerks that we just have to condone instead of people we can actively challenge and dialogue with to help them improve their worldview. It becomes even more insulting to the players that way. So going back to Eula, the main point of her character is rebellion and making a strong stance for the betterment of society even when it's very difficult to do so. And yet her personality can make it difficult for fans to warm up to her because she still acts like a snobby elitist that appears aggressive towards anyone except Amber. I did say that this was very good for her character for the sake of making her more realistic and well-rounded, but it is also realistic that people would be turned off by her attitude because of this both in-game and from the end of real-life players. Thus, her personality and motivations need to be processed very intricately rather than just forcing people to give her a pat on the back without understanding why exactly she deserves it. And by doing this, Hoyoverse has the opportunity to make her continuously grow as a person rather than having her character arc kinda stagnate. The thing is though, it's easy to complain about something, but it's much harder to make suggestions for improvements. Today, however, I will try to break the cycle of directionless complaints for the sake of ranting and propose ways for Hoyoverse or fanfiction writers to improve Eula's characterization. The first thing is that I think the Lawrence family's current crimes should be emphasized so that we have a better idea on the true source of Eula's disdain for them. Although yes, the historical abuses of the Lawrence clan might be sufficient motivation for someone to disown them, I feel like Eula's character stories focus a lot on just the elitism of her clan and how they force their children to adhere to strict rules on proper conduct. I do understand that the writers are trying to emphasize how controlling her family is, but they're emphasizing the more shallow problems with rich people, and now it accidentally looks like Eula left the clan to escape having to use the exact proper type of knife and fork every mealtime or something. Of course, common sense would tell us that Eula disowned the Lawrences for a much deeper reason, but with the lack of proper context, it seems like she's just trying to leave to escape the rules instead of leaving them because she's fed up with their crimes. So what the writers can do is introduce more Lawrence clan NPCs who are into illegal stuff And they should also specify their crimes. Because in Eula's story quest, yes, they were colluding with the Fatui, but I don't think we had much of an insight on what they'll do once they're in power again. Are they planning to monopolize a certain industry? Do they want to hire lots of workers at an extremely cheap wage? Or do they want to influence the Knights' policies to forcibly exempt them from paying taxes? Things like that must be detailed, and it should also be shown that Eula is aware of these and against these so that we can better get an idea of her sense of conviction. Another remedy I can think of actually is depicting how she had adjusted to her change in lifestyle living as a knight. She must have lived in a huge mansion before, but now she must live in one of those little apartments at the Favonius headquarters, just like Kaya. This way we can see how dedicated she was to disowning her family, that she'd accept any hardships because of how much she believes in her stance. It's because honestly, it seems like leaving the Lawrence clan to become part of the Knights was a somewhat easy decision considering the Lawrences were mean and the Knights are well regarded in Mondstadt. So now it accidentally looks like a form of social climbing as well, but in a more political sense rather than a social status sense. To counter this perception, the writers can show how much she sacrificed to become part of the Knights so that we can see how serious she's been at upholding her principles. Yes, I know that disowning your family is hard in and of itself, but the Lawrence clan looks insanely easy to throw under the bus, so the stakes of this decision don't seem highlighted. Perhaps she can also include conversations on how she's had to give up everything as a Lawrence and she still can't gain approval. Meanwhile, other aristocratic scions such as Diluc and Jean, who are insanely rich, can still keep their wealth while maintaining their social approval. That complexity can be worth delving into, and it'll be more interesting if both Diluc and Jean can also be there to discuss this with her. We can also use this to bridge the gap between her and the commoners of Mondstadt by showing that she now has a similar lifestyle to them. If she's living in one of those Favonius apartments, it's likely that she has more basic living conditions than that of the people criticizing her. So this fact can make them realize that her privilege has actually been eliminated to some degree, and they can now perceive her as an equal. Lastly, another simple solution to Eula's problems would be to have her spend time with friends other than Amber. Of course, we know Eula and Amber are very close for a reason, and their friendship is great. But Amber is the type to really be patient, sweet, and friendly enough to condone Eula's actions for the most part, often explaining her internal motivations to us. However, I think it would be great for Eula to hang out with people who can give her more honest feedback, and yes, these characters do actually exist. In Eula's first character story, we find out that she has regular tea parties with Jean and Lisa, and Kaya is able to explain Eula's motivations to some of the lower-ranked Favonius guards. Actually, the whole anecdote is very cute. I highly recommend you read it on Genshin Wiki if you don't have her. And the thing is, these friends can help Eula in different ways other than what Amber has been doing, although of course that's good for her too. I can imagine that when Eula commits a social boo-boo, any one of these three can better explain to her what she said wrong and facilitate conversations about class. For example, maybe Eula accidentally mentions something like, "Your father never gave you a pocket watch your entire life," or "You don't have a candelabra on your dinner table," and either Jean, Lisa, or Kaya can explain that these things are not in fact things that commoners have or experience, so it can help Eula understand the real world better. They can also maybe provide insight into how regular Mondstadters think. So for example, when Eula is once again bashed by any of them, they can both validate her frustrations while also calmly explaining the psychology behind these people's attitudes and behavior towards her to facilitate mutual understanding. Of course, this might happen off-screen, but it hasn't happened on-screen yet. But on top of all those suggestions, I think it's more important for Eula to just be a little bit more honest. Yes, I know that her being prickly like a porcupine is part of her personality, and too much honesty towards the traveler can become out of character at some times when someone goes out of their way to reveal their true feelings to the traveler even when they normally wouldn't do that. However, I think we can have ways for Eula to drop hints at her deeper frustrations so that she's not disclosing everything, but we can get a better understanding of her. Or we can also have side conversations with other playable characters and the traveler just overhears them, and it might not even be considered canon that the traveler knows about this conversation. Now with this, what can Eula be honest about? In my opinion, she can discuss things like how she feels frustrated that she finds difficulty in making the Lawrence clan accountable because they never seem to die down no matter how much the Knights of Favonius try to apprehend them. Or she can say that she wishes she were born in a different family. Maybe she can even say that she's considered quitting the Knights multiple times in favor of, for example, working as a chef in another country because, by the way, she's good at cooking, but she doesn't do that because she believes that she still has a duty to fulfill. Deeper talking points like these can be very helpful to make us understand Eula's struggles even as a rich or formerly rich person, and how frustrated she feels that no matter how much she tries, she can't really feel like she has properly redeemed herself. She can lament over the fact that even though she has changed her destiny, maybe she can never change who she really is deep down, her true nature, and how her feeling of agency and influence over her own life feels constricted because of this, so she struggles to feel freedom in the truest sense. I think that if Hoyoverse just allows her to be more honest without making her hide under the vengeance catchphrases, we may be able to understand, sympathize, and even see ourselves in Eula a bit more. I do know she has been honest sometimes, like during the bartending event, but to me it's not enough because while others' criticisms of her are making her feel really bad about herself, I feel like it doesn't go into self-reflection mode that much yet, so I believe Hoyoverse can still go deeper. I know we shouldn't count on them as much, but I hope in the upcoming event in version 3.8 they can attempt this to some extent, because I do believe that small improvements can still be done in the writing, and if they can't, well, we can always just salvage that with our own nifty little fanfictions and headcanons. So yeah, with all of that, I think Genshin players have to remember that Eula is not an entitled rich girl who thinks poorly of the common folk, but at the same time, I don't think her fans should ignore the fact that she still has lots of room for improvement when it comes to the way she associates with the common folk. I know this is too optimistic for the Genshin fandom, but I hope its more intellectual members can find a way to discuss conflicts between classes through Eula, because that is the purpose of her character for world building. Even though Genshin is not the best at executing her storyline, I still feel like it opens up a lot of interesting conversations, so we should use that to make insightful analysis threads, headcanons, fan art, or fanfiction instead of spewing out brain-dead nonsense. As for her participation in the main event for version 3.8, I hope Hoyoverse will somehow surprise us with some interesting storylines for her so that she'll become easier for us to appreciate. But anyway, now that my piece is said, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Will you be pulling for Eula next patch? And what are you looking forward to in terms of the main event storyline? What things do you like and or dislike about Eula's characterization? Or do you just like her because of her enormous damage? Let me know in the comments, or better yet, you can also follow me on Twitter at PurpleTarotBurb because I'm a lot more responsive to random thoughts and queries over there. If you enjoyed this little think piece on class conversations, make sure to leave a like, and if you're interested in videos like this one, please do consider subscribing to my channel to support my content and so that you can more easily get wind of my future content. That's all for today, and I'll catch you after the version update. Or maybe even before that.